Our last topic for Chapter 8 that we are going to discuss is prepayments required for the taxpayer as well as filing requirements. So, taxes must be paid as you go throughout the year in ways that can be achieved. Probably the most easiest way is withholding taxes from your income. So, like for example, an employee that works for a company can have their taxes withheld from their income, and that is treated as payments being made equally throughout the year. If the withholdings are potentially insufficient to meet the taxpayer's tax liability, then they have the option to make estimated tax payments throughout the year. And so those are quarterly payments, and those are due on April 15th, June 15th, and September 15th of the current year, and January 15th of the following year. If a taxpayer underpays their tax liability, they can be subject to penalties. However, the underpayment penalty can be avoided if their withholdings and estimated tax payments equal or exceed one of the two safe harbor provisions. So, the safe harbor provisions are that your withholdings and estimated tax liabilities must be equal to or greater 90% of your current tax liability or 100% of the previous year's tax liability. Or if you are an individual with an AGI that is greater than $150,000, then it needs to be 110%. Those safe harbor provisions are applied on a quarterly basis. So for example, the 90% of the current year tax liability provision, if we divide it by 4, then that means 22.5% of the current year liability must be paid in by that quarterly deadline. Or if we're looking at the 100% of the previous year tax liability option, if we divide that by 4, that means 25% of the previous year's liability must be paid in by that quarterly deadline. And then the underpayment penalty is based on the amount of underpayment at each quarter multiplied by the federal short-term rate plus 3%. For filing requirements, we know that individual taxpayers, at least, they are required to file a tax return only if their gross income exceeds a certain threshold, and that varies based on the taxpayer's filing status and age. The individual income tax return is due on April 15th, barring any holidays, but typically it's April 15th. And there is the option to extend the filing up to 6 months. So then that would allow the tax return to be due October 15th. However, that extension only applies for filing the return. It does not extend the due date for paying taxes. There is also a late filing penalty, and that late filing penalty is 5% of the tax owed per month, up to 25% if it is not a fraudulent tax return, Or if the tax return is fraudulent, it is 15% of tax owed per month up to 75%. And then there is no penalty if no tax is owed as of the due date. There is also a late payment penalty, and this applies if you don't pay the entire tax owed by the due date of the return. And that penalty is calculated as 0.5% of the tax owed for each month or fraction of a month that the tax is not paid. Additionally, if the late filing penalty and the late payment penalty both apply in the same month, the late filing penalty for the month and its corresponding maximum penalty is reduced by the 0.5% late payment penalty for the month. Let's look at an example to apply some of those penalty calculations. So, Courtney filed her tax return on April 10th and included a check with the return for $4,055 made payable to the United States Treasury. The $4,055 consisted of her underpaid tax liability of $4,000 and her $55 underpayment penalty. If Courtney had waited until May 1st to file her return and pay her taxes, what late filing and late payment penalties would she owe? So here, the combined late filing penalty and late payment penalty, so I'll kind of go backwards. I'll give the final answer first and then go through the math. So the combined late filing penalty and late payment penalty would be $200. And the way we would calculate that is the $4,000 late payment times 5% times 1 month or portion thereof, so May instead of April. And the combined penalty is limited to the 5% per month. That concludes Chapter 8. I wish you guys well in your studies, and I will see you soon.